Hazbin Hotel. That's right, folks. This is a new project coming to you from Amazon Studios, distributing from A24, I do believe. And it's a new animated series that if I don't know all of the history involved in this project. I do know that there was like a pilot episode that was like shot, or not shot, I guess, created, and it was uploaded to YouTube in like 2019, and then like was it like Amazon or MGM that bought the rights and they developed like an actual series based on that? I know that's the case. So that alone gives you like a lot of like starting off points to talk about this project, because there's a few things I do want to talk about before we actually get into talking about Hazbin Hotel. You know, because when you have something like this, which is like an internet swelling of a creation that is solely created from the internet, when an actual project starts to get developed from that, there are certain things that have to be addressed, and there are certain expectations that have to be met for a project like that. It's really interesting to see those things get developed, because this is a generation, and this is an era, even, I should say, where you can create your project online. You see a lot of animators today working on projects on YouTube or like on a Twitch stream or something, like developing their content that's accessible to a world that's not directly from like a streaming service or a cable network or something like that. So having a project solely from the internet where it's like this is a creator that made something for YouTube, that's always exciting to see. And then, you know, from there, it does become this thing of like, it's the internet culture. It's going to be aimed and created specifically for the internet culture, which can be a very fine line to cross. You know, you see some projects where it's like, oh, this person clearly comes from like a Tumblr background, or like they grew up thinking about these things and have that as their aesthetic. And that's all fine and mighty. Like, I have nothing against that. And then you have a project like this, Hazbin Hotel. There is a clear vision of like the jokes, the dialogue, the character design, the aesthetic that we are putting forward is very much of like somebody who is from this era, grew up with these things, had access to the internet to think and feel and behave a specific way. That is not something that's going to like, you know, destroy an like all-encompassing audience that's going to cover every single factor, but it is the internet genre. And the genre of the internet is very specific in tone. So that is going to make it very off-putting for some people. I'll say this now before we get into like the actual review. I like most of this. I think the things that it is doing is really interesting. And being somebody who has seen these other products start off online, start off on like a blog post, become this fully realized thing, like an internet short, a YouTube short or whatever, and then you get like a whole thing out of that, it's cool to see that happen, especially for something with this aesthetic, because I do like the aesthetic. On top of that, this is one of those types of stories that I find very fascinating, which is the heaven and hell stuff. And I know that's not for everybody, but as somebody who comes from like a very specific upbringing, who always had the distillation of what heaven and hell were represented to them in a specific lens, I love different interpretations of heaven and hell. In Hazbin Hotel, we follow Charlie Morningstar. She is the daughter of Lucifer. She is opening up this hotel so demons can come in, any past sinner can come into this hotel, be rehabilitated, and hopefully get into heaven, because heaven in this, they do like an annual like thing where they come like every year and they do like a cleansing and they start killing a bunch of demons. That's pretty interesting. There is definitely some cool stuff to say in there. And this is more like a problem given how I interpret the stuff between heaven and hell. I always find it so, not even lazy, but it's such like an easy route to take to present heaven as elitist and like better than, and always looking down on people. And it's always easy to present like, you know, look how alluring and sexy and like, oh, we're so dark and we do like fucked up stuff, like when it comes to like demons and hell and stuff. It's just so obvious, and it never comes across as something like truly interesting, which I don't like in a project like this, where I'm like, okay, the idea that there's somebody in hell who wants to rehabilitate demons, send them up to heaven, that's cool. But the entire time heaven's like, fuck you, we want to fucking kill you because you're a bunch of scummy pieces of shit. It's so lazy, and it's so uninspired, and it doesn't make me go, cool, that's a great interpretation of hell. That also leans into this thing of the internet. I don't want this to sound like I am commenting on people who like a specific thing. This is just more like, from what you've seen, the internet culture at large is a little more like rambunctious, rebellious. They like the idea of like, oh, I can punch God in the face and tell him to fuck off, which is fine. That's great for you, but when you're doing something like this, just always making heaven out to look pretentious, above it all, elitist, just so like snobbish. It never feels like somebody had an original idea for heaven, and more like, well, they're just assholes and hell's like cool guys partying, drinking, and fucking. It's I don't know. That stuff where I'm just like, I wish there was more developed in that area as opposed to making Adam, the first man, into like this fuckboy douchebag who thinks he's better than everybody. You could have done so much more from that instead of making him like a whiny bitch towards the end of it. All that said, it's a specific interpretation for a creator. I can't be mad at the vision that's made. Just as somebody who has grown up with like the complexity of heaven and hell always in their mind, it's something I'm constantly thinking about. It's one of those studies that I follow a lot of, like what people say about this stuff. Just always presenting like, why would you ever want to go to heaven? They're so snobbish. It's always bored me. And it never comes across as like somebody who's like interested. It's like, no, it's more like the fun and destruction. You have something from the internet that's based in like, hell's always cooler. The other part of this I do want to talk to before we get to the other projects, and I swear this is going somewhere, is there have been reports that the animation conditions for the animators working on the show haven't been great. And saying that, I've read an article. I'll link it. It's not from like a big top tier, like source or like, news outlet. But this being a project that's from the internet in that like area, I happen to believe it. Because the sad truth is we live in an era where animators aren't treated fairly. So if there is a report from an animated project where maybe the people involved in it were kind of worked to the bone, they weren't treated properly, their boss, the creator, was very abusive, like verbally, I tend to believe that. We've just been proven so many times that is the case. So you have this project that supposedly has bad working conditions, about somebody trying to show you like hell is more like willing to accept change than heaven, based on something from the internet, and it's bought by Amazon. That is a huge mixture of things to make Hazbin Hotel. And saying all that, I can't say this project was bad or uninteresting. It does things that don't interest me or don't come across as like a fully formed idea, but it is, without a doubt, somebody's vision. And I always love to see that, and this type of vision's pretty cool. The animation style is very interesting. It's kind of got like that old-timey flavor, kind of like the Cuphead show, where it's like we have a specific style, it's kind of retro, it's kind of throwbacky, everyone's going to have a distinctive look, they're going to have a distinctive feature, they're going to be based on like hellish things, but everything's going to blend together with like beautiful uses of like reds and yellows and blacks, and it looks so cool in that way. Like the character designs alone are super impressive. Every single one of them is distinctive. They have their unique flavor. It is very like 40s and 50s and 30s adjacent. It looks really cool that way. So many specific characters just feel really interesting, look really compelling, and just make this feel like a whole project in that capacity. We're like, okay, this one's like a cat demon, this one's like the radio demon, so his voice is modified, which is kind of cool to see. The villain's like a moth or like the TV guy, and you're like, these are really cool ideas. Like there's a spider one, and there's like a fallen angel one, and just like these very specific interpretations of these types of creatures. And it looks cool. And for the most part, I would say the voice cast, very impressive. All the voices feel like they would come from these characters. All of these people feel naturalistic when they are singing, which is really impressive, because the other thing about this too, it's a musical, which if you aren't aware of that can be off-putting. And I knew about that going into it. And in the first episode, I was like, okay, I think I know what we're getting into. Heaven's a dick. Hell wants to be better. But, the snobbish, elitist, heaven people, they don't want that shit. The angels don't like you. And I'm like, okay, from that first song in the first episode, I'm like, I get it. That's what you're doing to me. As the story went on and progressed in the 8 episodes, I was like, oh no, there's actually something to talk about here. Characters have growth, they actually learn something. Is the dialogue a little on the nose and obvious, where it's like we say dick and shit and fuck a whole bunch, where it's like, yeah, it's for adults. I get it. Like, it's very specific in that tone. And for that, you're like, I get it. Okay, we're in hell, so I guess it's okay. Overall, the story is very interesting. It does have something to say. It uses both the mythology of heaven and hell pretty interestingly while making it its like own unique thing. The worlds are never like truly defined. And that could kind of be a problem where you're like, okay, this is run by Lucifer, but nobody fears Lucifer. It's actually run by like cartel and mafia people. And then Charlie has no real power, but she is the princess of the place, but nobody like treats her like the princess. And then in heaven, everyone's just like an angel and they don't really like do anything. They just like walk in big corridors. The world itself, it's more like the design as opposed to like a fleshed out, lived in world, that's fine. You know, I like seeing like a random snake guy show up or like shark mafia guys show up. That's kind of fun to see. And then when it's like, actually, heaven's going to come down and kill us, so we have to prepare for wars, where I'm like, shut the fuck up for a minute, okay? Can't we just have fun seeing people trying to repent for their sins? Like, when it's that story, you're like, oh, so there's actually people trying to get better in hell. That's kind of interesting. But it's not really about that. It's more about, like, the camaraderie of the friendship that's built, and that leads to it. But you're like, nobody actively tries to get better except for maybe, like, 2 people throughout the 8 episodes. So if there is another season, which I think one is already ordered, I would like to see that explored more. Where, like, the basic concept of, like, people wanting to repent for their sins. That'd be cool. Like, that is the idea for the basis of this. I'd like to see that. Sometimes you see something and you're like, this is going to work for very specific people, and for those people, they're going to like everything that is encompassed in this. They're going to like the aesthetic, they're going to like the voice actors, they're going to like the songs, they're going to like the story, they're going to like the dialogue, they're going to like the script. But it does never come together fully as this perfect product. Now, the animation does look good, and it is very fluid, and I appreciate that. I'm sure there was a lot of crunching involved to get it there, so that does kind of hurt. But sometimes it just loses itself to its own momentum, and I think every one of the songs is really incredible and cool, and almost more interesting than the actual story that is being told here. It's like if you were just to make a music video with this type of style, it'd almost feel better. But hey, I am somebody who has very strong feelings about hell and heaven, and they're always in fluctuation, so an interpretation like this, where it's clearly like one person's idea of what this world looks like, that's not how I feel about it. So that's not going to do it for me. But a story about like the daughter of Lucifer trying to help people get out of hell, I find that very compelling. And, you know, sex jokes, raunchiness aside, there is something here to enjoy. It is compelling and fascinating and a cool enough idea where if you weren't aware of like this coming from like the online community, you might be like, oh, this is an interesting idea somebody had. But when you start to think about like, what are the projects that come from online? It's like these people with specific visions and ideas. And I'm not criticizing any of those people, but it definitely feels like a story that somebody would write as like a fanfic or an original character for something else. And that is in of itself pretty interesting. Nothing against that. But this show, I was smiling through it. I was laughing sometimes. But there are also times I felt like this was going nowhere. And the overall story just made me kind of roll my eyes. Be like, okay, I see it. Thanks for that. But I would encourage everybody to check this out. It is definitely something to talk about, to think about in some capacity of the word. But I don't know if it's going to make you think about the things it wants you to think about. That's what I'll say. So, Hazbin Hotel Season 1, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. Now, thank you all for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun, stay safe, good luck.